The first F1 race weekend of the season is now underway, as free practice takes place at the Bahrain International Circuit. Of the most interest to everyone will be who from the chasing pack is going to challenge Red Bull and mount a serious championship challenge. The team most desperate to knock Max Verstappen off his pedestal is Mercedes, as they look for revenge for 2021. But something about the car has got a lot of people worried. Have Mercedes repeated the fatal error that has hamstrung them for the past 2 seasons? Or is this going to be a new beast for the team to tame? Let's check it out. For the 2024 season, Mercedes have built themselves a brand new car. 2022 and 23 were not the successes the team were looking for. The imaginative but heavily flawed zero-side pod car wasn't capable of keeping up with the eventual champions Red Bull or runners-up Ferrari, and at times it was significantly slower than Aston Martin and McLaren as well. That is in the past now though, and for 2024 they've rebuilt the car from the ground up. Both Lewis Hamilton and George Russell have commented that in its basic feel, the W15 is a nicer, more stable drive than what they've had to work with since 2022. In particular, the unstable and unpredictable rear end seems to have been tamed somewhat, which was very much part of the brief behind the new car. The very different bodywork geometry and a cockpit which has been moved further back are just the most visually obvious of the changes, made to address the previous car's shortfall. But the real changes are in how the aerodynamic traits of the car have been defined. To make this overhaul happen, and to give a more sympathetic rear of the car, the rear suspension has been converted from pull rod layout to push rod, which has moved the suspension rockers up, giving more volume of airflow for the aerodynamicists to work with. Another feature aiding the quest for a better airflow to the rear of the car is the ingenious new front wing design, which has the top section cut away on the inboard side. Not only has this created a gap through which to direct airflow to the rear, but the exposed inner edge of the top flap will create a vortex because of the pressure differences acting upon the horizontal and vertical surfaces. This vortex will speed up the flow through the gap toward the back of the car. If the W13 and W14 were wild stabs into the extremes of what could be done in the current technical regulations, the W15 is a more subtle slice through them, finding the juicy good bits where performance can be found through innovation. The age-old rule of if it looks fast, it probably is fast doesn't quite apply to Formula 1 in the same way it did back in the early decades of the sport. But something that does give away potential performance is the whispers in the paddock, which start with the analysis happening in every garage on the pit lane. In Mercedes' case, those whispers are very positive. Naomi Schiff said on Sky Sports, "The long run from Lewis Hamilton has a few people in the paddock talking. Their race pace looks promising. Obviously, Ferrari's was as well. That has been their Achilles heel, and it looks like they've turned that around. There is more coming from Mercedes than they've managed to show." The worst secret nuggets that I've heard quite a few people in the paddock talking about. No one is suggesting that Mercedes were sandbagging during testing. They wouldn't make that mistake again so soon after it completely ruined them in 2022. But there are plenty of people who think they may be closer to Ferrari and Red Bull than how pre-season testing made it look. There definitely are negatives about this car which people are overlooking, and I'll talk about them in a second. But Toto Wolff has also been trying to put forward the image that everything is working exactly as expected. Speaking ahead of the first race, Wolff said, "A new season brings new opportunity, and it's exciting to be heading into a new campaign, with all the drama it will inevitably bring," he said. Each of the last 2 seasons, we've headed to the first race of the year on the back foot. After pre-season testing though, we can draw some initial conclusions. The drivers are much happier with the overall balance. The basic platform is working as we expected. The correlation to our simulations looks to be accurate. This is all encouraging. It's a good foundation that we can build on. Everything was sounding good for Mercedes, but George Russell has revealed that an old foe might be a problem in the W15. Porpoising was a massive issue for the team when the new ground effect technical regulations began in 2022. The now infamous Drive to Survive scene of Toto Wolff losing it at the other team principals at a meeting, claiming they were all endangering their drivers by lying about porpoising, will forever be my favourite part of that show. The fact that Mercedes were by far the worst sufferers of the problem seemed to escape Toto's mind at that moment, as did the fact that instead of fixing the problem like the rest of the teams, he lobbied the FIA to change the rules to help his team. Anyway, fixing that porpoising problem was such a difficulty for the team that it took half a season of Lewis Hamilton driving with experimental setups and upgrades before they could put him in an actual competitive car, which gave George Russell that deceptively impressive first season with the team. It is Russell who has now warned that the pogo-sticking Mercedes F1 car could be back. As he addressed the media in the Bahrain paddock ahead of this weekend's season opener, Russell was asked if there were any specific hangovers from the team's previous cars that were now being felt in the W15. "I would say this year's car is a totally different race car," he replied, to the point that the things we learned from last year in the way we were setting the car up, we'll need to approach it differently this year. So there's a lot to learn about this, and it feels much closer to how a race car should feel. But the one area that we need to continue to work on is probably the bouncing that we're seeing. We got caught up with a bit of bouncing last week. We were pushing the car really aggressively. But as I said, we're dealing with a totally different beast this year, whereas 2022-23, they were both cut from the same cloth. Fortunately for the now de facto leader of the Mercedes F1 team, this bouncing doesn't appear to be the same issue that plagued the team from the past 2 years. The bouncing Russell refers to appears to be centered on braking stability rather than porpoising. The bouncing under braking was seen in a couple of cars during the pre-season test days, but it was Mercedes W15 that was by far the worst of them. It may not be the dreaded porpoising returning to haunt the team, but instability under braking was a serious problem for the W13 and 14. Both drivers constantly complained about how unpredictable the car was when the brakes were applied. They were never quite sure if it would stop as quickly as they expected, or if the car would turn when they wanted it to. With a bouncy rear end under braking, that's going to be a problem again. In terms of raw performance, it isn't a problem that costs that much lap time, but when you factor in the driver's lack of faith in the car stopping, and therefore having to drive more cautiously into heavy braking zones, it will be costing them tenths of a second a lap. Russell finished by saying, "That's what testing is for. I'd like to think you'll be seeing much less of that this weekend." So 3 years on, I think a lot of teams can still enter this circuit and set the car up in a too low and aggressive manner. But it's always a fine line because that's where the downforce is. Stabilizing that back end, either via upgrades or setup tweaks, must be a priority for the team. Once they have a stable platform, they can start to really target performance with upgrades, but without a stable platform to build on, any changes to the car may just exasperate the problem. But bouncing is just one area that Mercedes need to work on, with George saying the car is lacking in downforce and outright performance. I'm confident that the development slope of this car should be greater than we've seen with the past 2 cars, because we've got a better platform. But it is just outright performance. You know, the car's feeling nice to drive, it's feeling good to drive, but we're just lacking downforce. It will be interesting to see how Mercedes deal with this bouncing problem. Their movable suspension arms means that they can alter their setup much more drastically than other teams, which may allow for an easy fix. Or it may just make the fix more complicated to find. I guess we'll find out soon enough though. What do you think of the new W15? Does this bouncing worry you, or do you have faith in the team to get it solved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and until next time, drive safe and bye for now.